We talk so much about the mother on this podcast. We talk about her body, her hormones, her sleepless nights, and rightly so, because matrescence is real and it deserves every bit of the airtime it gets. But we must acknowledge that there is usually someone else in the room, someone who is quietly going through his own transformation while all the attention lands on mom and baby. Of course, I'm talking about the dad. So this week in Sense by Meg Faure, I am joined by psychologist Dr Ange Nespola, and we are talking about the birth of a father, not the logistics, but the psychology. Because here's what nobody tells you. While mum's whole world is rightly narrowing down to baby, dad is losing one of his biggest sources of support at exactly the moment that he is supposed to be strong. We unpack why about 2/3 of couples report real strain in that first year. We talk about why postnatal depression in dads is real and why it is so underdiagnosed and why it can show up a full year after the baby is born and look like nothing that you would expect. And then we go there on the hard stuff too. We talk about the division of labor, which for me personally was an issue. The resentment that builds up when nobody's actually arguing about the dishes, they're actually arguing about whether or not they are seen. If you've ever felt like your partner is a little bit of a third wheel in those early weeks, or if you're the partner feeling like you on the outside looking in, then this episode is for both of you. Because a baby doesn't just need a mother who's held. Winnicott said mum holds the baby and dad holds the mum. But somebody needs to ask, who holds the dad? This is Sense by Meg Faure. The new episode is out now, so do stay on board, listen, and do share this episode with your partner because it will change how you hold each other through this moment.
Welcome to Sense by Meg Faure, where we make sense of the science and art of parenting. Parenting is grey, gritty, and beautiful all at once. And my life's work as a healthcare professional is helping parents feel more confident in a season that can feel really overwhelming. In each episode, we share honest conversations with real mums, dive into the science with experts, and simply make sense of it all in practical ways. This is your space. You're not alone, you're held. So let's unpack the journey of a lifetime with sense.
The partner is often the forgotten figure in the story of new parenthood. While the spotlight falls on the mom and the baby, something quieter and maybe even more fragile is actually happening on the other side of the room, and that is the birth of a father. Today we are welcoming psychologist Dr Ange Nespola, and I have followed her for ages on Instagram. If you don't follow her, please do go ahead and do so. And she really does speak very often around this journey to parenthood together as couples. And for me, that was what today's conversation was going to be all about. So Ange, welcome tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
It's really lovely to have you. And of course, it's incredibly topical. We're in the middle of World Cup soccer at the moment. And Jeremy Doku from France actually bailed out of the World Cup to go and be with his wife who was giving birth. And unbelievably, because I could hardly get my head around it, the world erupted into conversation around how he should not have done that, how he should have stayed with his day job and that he wasn't actually needed in the labor room. But of course, you can imagine that I was not very happy with this conversation. And the reason is that so often when a baby arrives, the conversation centers entirely around the mother and the focus on her being able to do this on her own. But from a psychological perspective, so much more is happening, and particularly for the father. And that's what I really want to talk about today. So could you share a little bit about what's going on for the dad during those early periods?
So I think as psychologists, we know that becoming a parent is one of the most significant life transitions you will go through as an adult. And I think we know that there's the birth of the baby. We know that, there's becoming a mom, but we don't often think of what is happening systemically for the family. So it's a becoming of a dad, becoming parents. Within the system, we have the couple subsystem, but we're now giving birth to a parental subsystem. And there's a lot of shifts that take place for that to happen. For a dad, there is a massive identity transformation that happens. And I think a lot of us focus on mom, rightfully so. Mom has gone through a lot, but we forget about dad and the transformation that he's going through. And I was thinking about this, and if I had to put myself in that position, for a dad, he is most likely losing one of the most significant support people in his life in that moment, as it should be. Mom's focus is shifting towards the baby, what we call primary maternal preoccupation, if I could use Winnicott terms. So that means that her entire focus, all of her energy is going towards baby. What happens for dad then is the energy that and the focus and the attention and all the love that he used to get shifts. Winnicott says that mom holds baby and dad needs to hold mom. But we need to ask ourselves, who holds dad in this time? So this is all healthy for attachment, but it must be a massive strain on dad. And research has shown us, dads do describe feeling immense joy and pride, and they want to support this process. But for them, there is a feeling of anxiety. There is immense pressure. And we know that men have been socialized to be strong, to suppress their emotions. And so very often they tend to suffer in silence. And they don't verbalize this because they're trying to hold it all together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just listening to you articulate that takes me back to the early days of all of my three children. I think I was so preoccupied with my children and also so preoccupied with my journey that I probably never actually fully identified what Philip must have been going through. It was only years later when I kind of started to realize the number of casualties in our family, in our circle of friends, in terms of their marriages. There were a lot of marriages that quite simply did not survive this period. And what does the research actually tell us about what happens in a partnership and how serious is the risk to the marriage if it is really unaddressed?
Yeah, so the research and what comes to mind is research by John Gottman. And the research shows that there is a significant decline in marital satisfaction. I think it was around 2/3, roughly. 2/3 of couples reported marital dissatisfaction within the first year. So I think what I want to highlight there is that a lot of this is normal, because I think couples go to panic. What's wrong with us? We're not doing it right. We're maybe not suited for each other. But this is a massive, monumental life transformation that you're going through. On top of that, your nervous system is stretched. You're exhausted. Going through an identity transformation as well. There's so much going on. So I think it's important to maybe get the message out there that yes, there might be some bumps in the road, but it's short-lived. If you use the opportunity, and this is what John Gottman then goes on to say in his research, and this is the good news, that you don't need major moments of connection. You don't need major romances, but that couples, particularly in the newborn phase, need to turn towards each other. Take those moments, those opportunities when your partner's trying to connect with you and connect. And it could be something like your partner saying, gosh, today was a really hard day, and not ignoring that, connect and be curious about that moment. Or maybe your partner says, can you just sit with me a while? Those are little moments of connection. And what he says is that is what predicts whether a relationship will survive. It's not the conflict, it's the repair. We know that. But it's also connecting in those micro moments, and parents will know the moments really are micro. They're quick and they're fleeting, and you've got to capitalize on those moments of connection.
And they are, one of the things that we did, and we did it from the time James was probably about 7 weeks old, so very little still, and that was my firstborn, is we had a date night once a week. In the early days, it was super short. It was like just 2 hours. Like we'd run down to we'd get a babysitter in, we'd run down to the ocean basket and come back. And we did, it was kind of that sort of story.
Yeah.
And then later on, it became a movie or a longer dinner. But we've always done it. And all the way through when we had our children living at home, my kids are older now. And I do think it's one of the things that actually, saved our marriage or was protective.
Yeah.
But, there were a couple of other things. And, somebody once said to me very wisely in the beginning, don't ever be critical about what your husband does when he tries to support you. Like, just tell him he's doing everything fabulously. If he puts a nappy on backwards, just don't even mention it. Like just let it all go, because
Yeah.
otherwise you're going to end up in doing it all yourself. If you're critical, he will bail and he'll go, okay, well, I don't know how to do this as well as you do, so why don't you do it, and I'll do, and that was very, very good advice. So how do we get dads involved? How do we get them? I mean, how do we work as a team? I mean, what does that really look like, I guess, in the first year?
Think, and if I could maybe reflect, I had my second baby at the end of last year, so it's still very fresh. So I'm so grateful to be doing this conversation and to think about it a little bit as well. I think it's making a decision that you're not going to continuously correct and control. I think that impulse, at least for me, to try and correct or to step in and do it yourself often comes from an anxiety. There's a lot of anxiety with becoming a parent, particularly the first time. I think the second time I found it, a lot more relaxed, and you can enjoy it a little bit more. But I think it's a decision. I think it's a decision to let him do what he needs to do,
Mm,
even if it's not perfect. It's
yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Ask yourself, is my child safe?
yeah,
Then it's fine. Just because he's doing it differently doesn't mean he's doing it wrong. I
yeah,
think we need
absolutely.
to make that shift. And I've often, spoken to friends where they'll say, you won't believe, but my husband is doing put down better than me, so I've handed it over. Or dad is doing this better. It often comes with the second child, I think, because you're
Yeah,
able to let go a little more. But I do think you need to make that commitment before. Know that you are going to have this impulse to want to jump in, thinking
yeah,
you know how to do it, but let dad be. Let him get involved, because I think the moment we stop the process and don't do it like that, use that cream, put the net on this, whatever it is that's important to you. I think dad hears, I'm not doing it right, I don't trust you. And naturally, that happens over and over. Anyone is going to start pulling back.
yeah,
You're going to
yeah,
start isolating from the process. And that has implications and ramifications for dad's bonding with the
yeah,
baby. Dad will start to feel like he's on the periphery, and he'll start
yeah.
feeling isolated. So yeah, that's what comes to mind for me.
Amazing. Very interesting. I think lots of fathers end up feeling like they're a bit of a third wheel, particularly if mum is breastfeeding. I think breastfeeding is such an incredibly intimate experience between a mother and a baby, and it's actually very exclusive because nobody else can do it. It's
Yeah.
there are no other options, and so these dads end up feeling like a third wheel, that they're kind of present, but they're on the periphery. What psychological harm can that cause in the long term? And what does a couple do when one parent is bonded, as an example, and that's a good example, and when the other parent hasn't? And I mean, just to give a bit of context here, this often swings, and it's very interesting. I'm sure as a seasoned mum, you will know this, that there will be a time where it's incredibly exclusive around the mom, for instance, in breastfeeding, and there'll be another time when dad is the flavor of the month, and mom actually feels quite rejected, particularly and I found it with my son in particular in the
Yes.
toddler years. He was like, I just was not cool. He was a boy. It was just as his kind of identity was coming through, and I
Yeah.
just wasn't the flavor of the month. And so, how do you manage that? I mean, there's a little bit of hurt and jealousy, I remember, from my side about my son wanting the dad and not me. And of course, fathers must feel it the same. So, how do you cope with that?
Yeah. So I think anyone who's on the periphery, I think there's a lot of pain that comes with that. There's a lot of hurt, and certainly will go against the expectation, the dream that they had when they saw their family coming together. And I think with that, we're wired for connection. So any time where that is threatened, there's a lot of pain that comes up with that. The difficulty is that if dad then starts to withdraw, there's a sense of loneliness that, comes with that. And as time goes, the more he withdraws, the bigger the gap becomes for the bonding. I do want to say though, I think there's so much pressure to bond with your baby immediately, to attach. But we know that attachment doesn't happen immediately. Attachment happens over thousands of ordinary moments. So dad is going to bond over time. And in the beginning, I know, like conversations with my husband as well, he doesn't quite know where his role is. Like you say, mom is breastfeeding and she kind of knows her role. Dad isn't quite sure. He's got to figure it out. And his role becomes more apparent as time goes, as baby needs mom a little bit less. So in the newborn phase, his role is to support mom. But as mom, is needed less and less by baby, dad, his role becomes a little bit more pronounced.
Yeah.
So I think what's important there is to let dad do the things when he can, if he can, and allow that bond to form, because it happens in the nappy changing, in the bathing, in those ordinary mundane moments. That's where bonding happens. That's where attachment starts to develop. It's not in one moment or in the first week of life, and I think dads start to panic in those first 2 weeks because they don't quite feel it yet, maybe. And that's okay. It doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah, very interesting, very interesting. So there's obviously a lot of talk now about perinatal mood and distress and postnatal depression, call it what you will. And we all identify that is a multifactorial issue around women feeling low and anxious and distressed during pregnancies. And a piece of it is hormonal, which is, in response to the massive hormone shift that happens at birth. But a piece of it is also associated with the shift in identity, the shift in roles, and just the absolute massiveness of this life stage event. So if we're saying that dads are also experiencing a massive life stage event, do we see postnatal depression or perinatal distress in dads as well? And if so, we don't talk about it. And is it underdiagnosed?
Yeah, absolutely. So it definitely is something to look out for. The worldwide estimate is that 1 in 10 dads would experience postnatal depression. That's worldwide. If we're looking at your lower income countries, the estimates are a little bit higher. I think it was around 15% to 20% of dads, which is a really high number. Another little bit of interesting emerging, so I do want to highlight it, is emerging research that highlighted that many dads were experiencing postnatal depression much later. So around the baby's 1-year birth date, so 12 months later, these symptoms of depression were starting to
So
present, which I
interesting.
found very, very interesting. So that's something to take note of. It does get missed. And I think there are two reasons that come to mind as to why this, might be missed. The first is it often doesn't look like what you think it would look like. Dad's experience might not be one of low mood and sadness. His depression might present as isolating, or maybe overworking, throwing himself into work, or unhealthy coping, mechanisms like drinking or irritability, maybe. And that's often one that presents with a picture of depression, many pictures of depression, but in particular with fathers, is irritability. And we don't clock it. Family members might not notice it as depression because it's not what we expect depression to look like, the sad, low mood. So that's the one reason, I think. The other reason is I think dads feel like they can't speak about it. They need to be the strong one. And so they isolate and they don't speak about it. Maybe they don't even realize it for themselves. And then if I think back to my postpartum period, frequently I would have check-ins with my healthcare providers. So at the hospital, they'll check in on my mood. The nurse would check, the gynae would check, at my follow-up appointment with the gynae would again check. So there are people frequently screening because we're very aware of mom and postnatal depression. I think family members were also checking to see if I'm okay. No one did that for my husband. Right. No one checked in on him. And so I think because of that, it often kind of slips by unnoticed.
And, I think another thing does happen as well, and that is that women have become increasingly better in recent years about speaking about matrescence and how hard it can be. And also women are, well, I mean, in general, we are more readily vulnerable. We will talk about our vulnerabilities, and we have a network. And I think, there will be other moms that we're meeting up with, at a mom and baby class of some sort. Dad's at work, so he doesn't have somebody who's going through the same life stage as him. And so I think, the fact that it can become very isolating. He doesn't talk about it. So yeah, it is a very at-risk period. And I think you gave some really amazing tips there of what mums can look out for, which is really amazing. So I want to shift the attention to the division of labor. And I mean, I don't know if I'm abnormal, but my husband and I definitely had this. And in fact, we still do. I hate to admit, but there is a piece of me that wants him to know that I'm carrying so much. And sometimes it feels like I'm carrying more than him. And of course, from his perspective, he wants me to acknowledge how much he's carrying, and that actually he sometimes feels that he's carrying more. So this is really, I think, an area, certainly in our marriage. If I look back in our marriage, this has probably been the area we've had the most fights, is around the division of labor. How do parents navigate that? And is it common that you see that in marriages?
Yeah, it is. I think it is a very common experience, and I think it can manifest at different life stages. So the newborn stage is one of them, but I think it's an ongoing conversation and an ongoing challenge, I suppose, that crops up. I think the first thing is these conversations need to happen before the resentment builds. Because the reality is that by the time this conversation is coming up about the division of labor, we're not actually arguing about the bottles or the dishes or the laundry anymore. There's something much deeper. I think it's not about the 50-50 division of labor. I think what is then coming up at that stage is, do you see everything I'm doing? Do you see that this is hard for me? Do you appreciate me? Do you know what it's like for me? I think they're very vulnerable feelings that come up for, for couples during this experience. So I think these conversations need to be ongoing. And I do think what's helpful and what I often tell clients is it's really not about 50-50 division, but it's more about understanding what each person is going through. I think it's important that both partners know what needs to happen. Like, what is everything that needs to happen to keep this household going, to keep the kids' schedules going, because mental load is a big thing. And this is honestly not something I knew in theory, but it's not something you can understand till you step into that mom role. I think at any given stage, a mom has 10 tabs open in her brain. There's so much going on. So it's helpful if dad knows what is going on, if mom knows what is going on for dad, so that we can support each other, not looking at, well, you're doing this, let's have a tally, da-da-da-da. It's not 50-50. I think it's more understanding, where can I step in? What can I take off of your plate? And that happens, I think, through ongoing conversation, because capacity changes. My capacity is not where it was a month ago, and it's probably not where it is, in 2 weeks' time, it might be different. And so we need to continue to have those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we did, because, sleep deprivation is really, really tricky. And unfortunately, and I can remember being told, dad must get up with you for the breastfeeds, and he can do the change of the nappy, and then you do the feeding. And very quickly I worked out that this was pretty much the most illogical thing that I've ever seen in my life, because now you've got two sleep deprived parents. So there's no perfect rule book, but what we did is we split the mornings, the days at 4 a.m. So everything from bedtime to 4 a.m., or from the time I went to bed to 4 a.m. I did. He just never got up at night. It just wasn't worth two of us having to be up, and I was the one who was breastfeeding. So, just that was the way it happened. But anything after 4 a.m., he would have to get up, get the baby, bring it into my bed, like literally pretty much latch it on me, take it away, change the nappy, and then take care of it for the morning. And that is how we actually worked that out right through into the toddler years. And of course, there's that terrible early morning toddler, where everybody's watching whatever terrible TV program at kind of 4 a.m. because the baby's now awake for the morning, the toddler's awake for the day. And so my husband always took those ones. And I must be honest, I'd rather do the night feeds than sit up at 5 o'clock in the morning when everyone's woken up for the day. That was my hell.
We actually did something very similar, Meg. Our shift started at 3. My husband's shift starts at 3. And mainly because he's a morning person and I really need to thaw in the mornings. So we also had a shift just so that we can each get our rest, build up strength and get a good chunk of sleep.
Yeah, no, and it is really, really important because I think it's that sleep deprivation is an absolute killer. And, obviously when you're sleep deprived, you can also end up being overstimulated, dysregulated, unable to actually regulate emotions that pre-baby you would have been able to regulate. You would have been able to negotiate with him. You would have been able to navigate strong emotions. But now suddenly you're sleep deprived and you just don't have the psychological capacity to eyes and to kind of listen. It just becomes a complete minefield. So, I mean, I guess dysregulation is going to affect parents. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit to that and also maybe give a few tips on how parents can regulate in order that they actually, can be a little bit more mature than toddlers when dealing with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think it's really hard to be your best self when you're tired and when your nervous system is doing cartwheels. I think that's a particular time where your vulnerabilities come up, parts of yourself that you've maybe worked on, healing that you've done. When you're tired and sleep deprived and hormonal and whatnot, those things come up. So maybe, I don't know, you've got a partner who isolates when they're struggling and they've worked on that. But the moment you're tired and you're overstretched and you're overwhelmed, you're going to revert back to that pattern. So I think that's important to note. And I think overstimulation in parenting is a major, major thing that I did not expect. And just thinking about a conversation I had with my mom the other day, I might digress slightly, but I'll get back to my point. She likes to buy these loud toys with lights and, for my toddler. And he loves it, obviously. But the one day I asked my toddler, can you just turn it down a notch, not put it on the highest level? And my mom looked at me and she was really surprised that I asked that. So she's quite used to my husband, asks him to like tone it down. But she looked at me and she's like, you grew up in an Italian family. You're very used to chaos. You're very used to loud, which is true. I love it. And so I said to her, I know, but as a parent, I'm very often overstimulated. There's somebody climbing on me. There's somebody needing me. There's like 4 people calling me. There's a really big component of parenting that is overstimulating. And so she looks at me, she's like, yeah. And I think she remembered in that moment what it was like. And it clicked for her that overstimulation is a big thing. And I think added to that, lack of sleep also, weighs in. Lack of sleep is torture. Everything falls apart. Your hormones, your worldview changes, the way you see yourself change. Everything changes when you're not sleeping.
And it's so interesting what you say because we all have different sensory thresholds. And I'll never forget a few years ago, I was actually lecturing to the MPhil students, psychiatrists, doctors who were becoming psychiatrists at Valkenburg Hospital in the Western Cape. And I was doing a talk on sensory personalities. And afterwards, one of these psychiatrists came up to me and he said to me, his wife was pregnant with twins. And he said he knew that she had a low sensory threshold, that she had a real propensity for overstimulation. And he said, just knowing now that this was a risk factor for her meant that he could cater differently in their relationship. And it was just incredibly insightful where he had identified that she was likely to have a low threshold. She was likely to be dysregulated by the end of the afternoon. And so he then would compensate for her. And I think if parents can identify that in each other, because sometimes it is not, it's the other way around, where the husband has been when the partner's been out at work all day, he's had the stress of being in the real world. He comes home for some respite and the house is not, it's not peaceful, especially once you've got, as you know, you've got a toddler and a newborn, it is chaos. And so really identifying for each other that actually, okay, he's out of capacity right now. I'm going to have to pick up the pieces because he just can't self-regulate, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think alongside that, noticing within yourself when you're starting to feel dysregulated, when that feeling is starting to crop up, know what it feels like in your body so that you can ask for help before. So when you feel that feeling crop up, that you can actually say to your partner, look, I just need a moment, and know what's going to work for you. For some people, it's a cup of tea, a little bit of fresh air. Look, you don't have a lot of time. You've got to make 10 minutes work. So find something that you can do in that time just to regulate, figure out what it is for yourself that you can do in that 10 minutes.
Yeah. Oh, well, this has been the most incredible conversation, Ange, and I'm sure that there are lots of parents who are thinking about their marriage and their relationship and their partners and potentially want to get hold of you. Where would people be able to get hold of you if they wanted to have a session with you? I mean, you do see patients, I'm guessing.
Yes, I do see. I'm on maternity leave at the moment, but I will be back. So my website is www.angenespola.co.za, and that's ANGENESPOLA.
Brilliant. Well, we'll definitely pop those into the show notes. And Angie, I just have a feeling that you and I are going to be working together more closely. So I have loved your conversation. I think it's been exactly what parents need to hear at the moment. And, to work together as a team is hard sometimes, but the ultimate reward is absolutely massive. And I think you've highlighted a lot of that today. So thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. I think we all need reminding, myself included. So this is good for me too, to just remind myself and revisit the literature and integrate it into our lives. Because I think that's a big goal for me with doing things like this, is to make the research, to make psychology applicable to everybody, because it is. It needs to be relevant to everybody. So thank you so much for having me.
A pleasure. Thanks so much, Ange.
Thank you for joining me today. I hope today's conversation brought you a little more clarity, calm, and confidence on your parenting journey. If you enjoyed the episode, please do share it with a friend who needs to hear it today, and also go and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss out on an episode. I'll be back next week with another episode, same time, same place, and always here to support you. And in the meantime, download the Parent Sense app to take the guesswork out of feeding, sleep, weaning, routines, and everything in between.